Welcome to the Healthy Family Project podcast. I'm your host, Amanda. I'm a mom of two and passionate about bringing parents and caregivers useful and digestible information to help make this journey just a little easier, more fun, and of course with some laughs. I love digging deep into topics and sharing my own struggles and successes with our listeners. I can't wait to share this journey with you.
Hi everyone, my name is Trish James and I'm a team member here at the Healthy Family Project. Amanda has given me the microphone this week and I'm really excited to share this podcast with you. I recently sat down with Julie Lythcott-Haims. She's a New York Times bestselling author of several books, including How to Raise an Adult and Your Turn, How to Be an Adult. I have two boys. I have a junior in high school. I have a middle schooler. And so this topic is just really near and dear to me. I really love her perspective. I love her words of wisdom on helping our kids really blossom into adulthood. I've read her books several times. I've seen her speak on occasion. So I really just was thrilled with being able to sit down and talk to her. I really think that you'll find a lot of value and wisdom in what she has to say. And I really hope you enjoy it.
Hi, Julie. I really appreciate you joining us today. I actually first heard you speak in 2017. My friend and I, we were at the women's conference in Pennsylvania, and we heard you speak, and we immediately bought your book. At the time, my guys were younger. She had like a 2 or 3 year old, and it's just really great to hear you and to talk to you today. I'm so excited for you to join us. So thank you very much.
Trish, thank you so much for having me. You're making me chuckle because I remember that Pennsylvania Women's Conference. It was October 2017, and my new book, my memoir on race, had come out that day. It was publication day. And so I was feeling just very excited and just in that zone of like, wow, something new is entering the world and I hope it does well. And
yes.
And I really, of course, the Pennsylvania, the conferences for women are an amazing organization. And it was just a lot of great energy that day. So I'm glad you were there. I'm glad to be here.
Yes. Yes. Thank you. So what was your inspiration for the book? You talk about it a little bit in the book, but what was really your inspiration when writing the book?
For How to Raise an Adult.
Yes.
I was a dean on the campus at Stanford University. I was observing how childhood had changed from the late 90s. Through the 2000s, we saw an increase in the number of parents who were basically showing up on campus to behave for their student or to do things for their student, evincing no confidence that their student could handle the basic stuff. I mean, register for classes, talk to faculty when they had concerns, sort out run-of-the-mill problems, navigate a bureaucracy, just the stuff of life that prior generations of college students had managed to handle more or less, not perfectly. It's never about perfection, but life is learned. You learn how to live life by living life as opposed to by having life handled for you.
Right.
So I was seeing too much handling. And I grew concerned because I could also see that students weren't very confident about their ability to handle stuff. So, and they were relieved when their parents got involved. And I thought, hey, wait a minute, long term, what's going to happen? What if these kids, quote unquote, don't ever learn? What's going to become of them? What's going to become of our society?
Right.
The whole generation can't #adult, which is a term, of course, millennials began using. So it was really an empathy for young adults who seemed, although highly academically achieving, they seemed underbaked when it came to their how to navigate my way through life kind of skills. So that's why I wrote that first book.
Right, exactly. And I love that term, underbaked. I am currently baking my own children. I love that. I love that term. So one of the things you kind of throughout the book, you go talk about the little ones, you talk about, middle schoolers, and then you talk about young adults going in from high school to college. And again, when I first read the book, my little ones they're not little anymore. My big ones were little then. And I was definitely a helicopter parent. I mean, I was told I was a helicopter parent. I wore that badge very proudly. And then I started to realize like, this really isn't working. And I could see the boys really trying to pull away. And I was trying to, go after it even more. So, but one of the things that you talk about is why we do it is that like, we're so scared, the dangers of outside or, people picking up kids and, get them getting hurt. And so you really talk about how we need to get back to when we were little and we were just, see ya, and go outside and we'll see, we'll see you at lunchtime. So why is it that important to you? And then to follow up, do you have any advice and tips for moms and dads who are trying to not be helicopter parents, especially when they're little?
Absolutely. So the first thing I want your listeners to know is I have kids. My kids are now 21 and 19. And I saw a problem on my university campus, as I explained, and it wasn't a Stanford problem. It was an American problem that I happened to notice at Stanford, but deans and faculty across the country at all different types of colleges and universities were seeing the same thing. Parents who seem to feel a need to do for their kids because maybe their kids couldn't do for themselves. So I'm this dean working with other people's kids, but then it turns out, even though I'm railing against the over-involvement at college, I come to this very mortifying realization some years into this, that I too am a helicopter parent, that though I can rail against it when I see it in other people's 18 and 20-year-olds, I'm doing it with my 8 and 10-year-old. And my aha moment was, came home from work one day, sat down for dinner, sat next to my 10-year-old. We were having chicken that night, and I leaned over his plate and began cutting his meat.
Yeah.
And it's a perfect example, right?
Okay.
We want to be helpful. We want to be safe. We want to be efficient. So of course we can cut the meat safely because we're the grown-up. And of course we can do it quickly because we're the grown-up.
Right.
And we can make it all happen. Why? Because we're the grown-up. So my point is, that was my aha. Oh my gosh, I'm not going to be able to let go of this kid with any confidence in either his brain or mind that he can do for himself when he leaves our home at 18, because I'm cutting the meat of a 10-year-old. And I realize every single life skill has to be taught. First, we do it for them, but at some point they do it themselves. And there's this process, 2 steps in between there, where we teach them and watch them, and we all develop confidence that they can do it. So I want your listeners to know, I am not this author pointing fingers at helicopter parents, or / I am, yet I'm pointing the finger largely at myself and saying,
back at me.
Please learn from my mistakes, because I've seen how it plays out. So of course we're afraid. Of course we love them. And yet, if you just take parenting out of this moment, like I need to ensure right now that everything is fine, and take the long view, which is I'm going to be dead one day and need to know, and my kid needs to know that they've got it, that they know how to use good judgment about crossing the street, about how to behave in a store or a mall, that they know how to navigate the bureaucracy of a school or a job situation, that they know how to fill out forms and track their own deadlines and apologize for their own mistakes, right? We are metaphorically carrying them on our shoulders through life as if they are still infants who are helpless. And then if you expect that you can set somebody down and just plop them on the ground and expect them to be able to do all of these things, you're really in for a rude awakening. They won't be able to, and that's on us. So it's about that long term. My job as a parent is to put myself out of a job, to develop pride in that, not to have pride in I do everything for my kids. I handle everything. When they forget something, I drop everything and show up at their school with the forgotten homework or the forgotten sporting equipment. That's not good parenting. If it's an emergency, yes, do it. Okay. But you're supposed to say, oh, sorry, buddy, that sucks. How do you think you're going to handle that? Bummer. That's something a 10-year-old can solve. I love you so much, instead of doing everything for them. That's to parent for the long term, to help the kid learn, this is my life. I am responsible. I can learn. And guess what? When they do learn how to do things, whether it's a life skill like cooking a grilled cheese sandwich on the stove or crossing the street, or when they do learn, hey, I forgot my backpack. My teacher said, all right, you better remember tomorrow. I remembered the next day because it didn't feel good when I had forgotten.
Right.
That's how they learn and grow. And that's what we're supposed to be delighting in. Instead of doing everything for them, we're supposed to delight in them constantly acquiring more and more skills, because that leads to competence, then confidence, and their mental health
Right.
is really shored up by, I can do things, I can bounce back when things go badly. Okay, we are undermining their mental health by doing everything for them and by setting the path to make sure there aren't any bumps or blips. So it's really about a short-term perspective, which looks like overparenting works, and appreciating long-term, it doesn't work. It leads to disastrous outcomes.
Right. Yeah. It's so interesting because, at Healthy Family Project, we really work hard to talk about getting kids in the kitchen and helping them cook and be a part of that process. And so I was really good at that. My kids that were in the kitchen. But when you talked about the backpack, every single time my kids forgot something, I'd run to their school and I would get so mad. I'm like, why? Like, why can't you remember? Well, because they didn't have to remember.
That's right. That's exactly right. Yep.
Right.
Let me just give you that quick 4-step method, because whether it's crossing the street or making a meal, we go from doing it for them to one day they can do it. But the steps in between that are missing are, okay, so it's first you do it for them. Picture your kid is trying to learning to, you're crossing the street. First you do it for them. You're holding them on your shoulder. They don't have to think. They just get carried. Step 2, you do it with them. You stand at the curb, you hold their hand, you announce, hey buddy, we're going to start to learn to practice crossing the street. It's going to take some time. Here's how we do it. And you use your teaching voice, which is slow and compassionate. You talk about looking left and right and left. You're teaching your kid where to look and how to wait till they know it's safe. You do step 2 enough times, holding their hand, narrating out loud, where you can get to step 3, where you show up at the curb this day and say, hey baby, hey kid, whatever your language is, hey, it's your turn now. I'm still here just in case. I want to hear you think it through. I want to hear you analyze whether it's okay to cross. And you let go of their hand. They're not going to dart out into the street. They've passed that point.
Right.
You hear your little one say, okay, I look left and right and left. And you have to say, okay, buckaroo, slow down. You have to actually look and be sure. And you're teaching. None of this can happen if we're so busy that we can't take the time to teach. Of course, it's more efficient for you to snatch your kid up in your arms and run across the street, but they'll never learn.
Right.
Step 3 enough times that you and they can have confidence they know how to cross the street. That's step 4. That's the 4-step method. It's on my website.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I really appreciate that. And, a lot of times I will implement that here at home, especially as they're older and they have to, communicate with adults or, get involved. Hey, I don't know what this year was Zoom, and virtual school, and they had to build their confidence to be able to communicate with teachers when they weren't there face to face. And so my husband and I we said, okay, here, this is what you do first. And then the next time, we'll sit here and watch you. And now they communicate with their teachers independently, and we don't really even need to be get involved. And so that's always, it makes us proud. I mean, it's a little nervous, right? Because you don't know what they're saying in the email. But I really appreciate that step. So my youngest right now, he's in 6th grade, or going into 6th grade. I'm sorry. My husband teaches 6th grade, and he always says that, this is a transition year. They come in as elementary students and they leave as these middle school kids, these, teenagers. And it's really hard, I think, as a mom this is the time where I have the hardest time letting go, because I still picture them as an elementary student, even though their teachers know that they're a middle school student. So do you have any advice on how parents can let go a little bit during this time with as they're going into middle school without being overly involved in every aspect of their day?
So my caveat here is I've never been a middle school teacher. I was a college dean, right? I saw a problem at the college level, and I've tried to dial backwards and show what childhood will look like in order to have college students who can. So with that said, of course, I'm full of opinions. Here's the visual metaphor I want every parent to hang on to. And I think it works very well for the transition from elementary to middle and middle to high and high to what's after. Remember when they were learning to walk. Remember when your kid, roughly age 1, was learning to stand up and then take those first steps. What did they do? They failed. They fell down and they struggled and got back up. And you didn't try to intervene.
Yeah.
You applauded. You didn't get embarrassed. You didn't yell. You didn't, fix it for them. To fix it for them would have been you on your knees behind your kid with your 2 fingers under the right armpit and 2 fingers under the left armpit, holding them up basically with your hands under their armpits and nudging them forward. So it appeared from the front that they were walking, but you wouldn't have done that because intuitively they're not walking. I'm walking for them. If they fall, they're sinking into my body. I'm propping them up. That's helicopter parenting. We didn't do it when they learned to walk. When parents ask me, how do I give my kid, when do I start to give my kid more independence? When do I start to let go? I say, why did you stop letting go? Because that's what you were capable of when they were learning to walk, or picture the visual of when they learned to ride a bike. You could only hold on to that seat for so long. And trust in the faith of like humans being capable of learning to balance, deal with gravity, right? That they were, and they might fall, and that's how they learn. So parenting comes with wincing. Parenting comes with,
that's a good one. Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Necessary. You don't want them to bike off into a 4-lane highway. They should be practicing on a safe road. That's your job. Set the context in which the skill can be learned. And then back away. When your 1-year-old is learning to walk, you make sure that there aren't any glass objects that are pointy that they're going to fall on and impale their brain with, right? You make sure the living room or the family room or wherever they're learning is set up so that it's a fairly soft environment. When they fall, they will fall. They need to fall. You make sure the environment won't harm them when they do fall. The delight that kid feels when they pick themselves back up and keep going, the smile on their face, the strength in those little chubby thighs and in that core only develops when we let them. So take that now to middle school. What is the skill? A middle schooler, I think, should be able to get themselves to school. If you're dropping them off, do not walk them into school any longer, barring significant special needs. Like, your job is done when if you drive them to school. Say goodbye at the car. The kid should be going into school. The kid is responsible for making sure their backpack is there. If they forgot it, you smile and say, I'm so sorry, buddy. I can't bring it, but what can you do to resolve the problem? You start critical thinking. You say, that sounds like, you're frustrated. You empathize. It's called empathize and empower, right? I'm so sorry that happened. How do you think you're going to handle it, buddy? Maybe the best way for them to handle it is simply an email to their teacher saying, I'm so sorry, I left my backpack at school, if they left it behind. Or they get to school and they say, you don't go into the teacher and say, we were so busy this morning, we forgot our backpack. No, it's not your backpack. Stop using we when you mean your son, your daughter, your child, right? Stop being the one. Say to your kid, okay, you're going to need to explain to your teacher what happened. I'm sure, I have confidence that you can handle this. You say that with a smile. You don't act all alarmed. That conveys to the kid, my mom or my parent believes in me. I can do this. It might be tough, but I'm believed in. I'm being rooted for. That's it. And then you are going to need to call a friend and say, oh my gosh, I'm a terrible. No, you're not a terrible mom. You're actually teaching your kid to do for themselves. Now, if this was the recital, if it's the end of 6th grade, 7th grade, big bloody blah symphony, I don't know, there's an instrument that the kid left behind and they've been practicing for months. That's not the day to say, too bad, so sad. That's the day to bring it. Same with waking your kid up. There are people waking their college students up, Trish.
Yeah, that's tough.
Okay. You don't want to be teaching.
No, you don't want to be doing that.
Well before high school.
Yep.
They should be waking themselves up.
Yep.
If they can't wake themselves up, that is a problem. It may mean they're not sleeping enough. That is a problem.
That's a good point. Yeah. You didn't think about that.
Okay. Let's not let the system undermine our kids' sleep. Let's not be our kids' alarm clock. And let me make a point here that privileged families can rescue their kids. Families that have a parental figure who can drop everything to bring the forgotten item are families of privilege. If you're working class, your boss isn't going to let you take time off to go. True. Okay. So these practices that frankly schools should not allow are privileging the already privileged. In that the kid gets the problem solved. Of course, long term, the poor and working class kids have more grit, have more skill. they've had to do more for themselves. So in the
Right.
long run, I think in some ways it does even itself out. The overprivileged kids can't do anything for themselves. That I'm rooting for everybody to have more accountability, more responsibility. It actually ultimately feels good inside the kid to know I took care of business, I handled it, my teacher's proud of me, I feel good. When we overhelp, we undermine their sense of I can, and that leads to depression. It leads to anxiety. So we've just absolutely got to pull back.
Yeah. No, that's so interesting that you said that, because when they were younger, I started working from home, and I really did have the ability to just stop what I'm doing and run it over, because it really wasn't a big deal. But then what happened was I was starting to get busier, or I had a meeting, and then I'd be like, no, I'm sorry, I can't. And it was a crisis. And I'm like, oh, no. So see, I set this expectation that I was on call for you. I'm not on call for you. Yeah.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
absolutely right. And again, you're not being mean. You're not being obnoxious. It isn't that authoritarian, mean parent.
Right.
You say with a smile, I've got a job. School is your job. You've got to take care of your responsibilities. I've got to take care of mine. I love you so much. If something goes wrong, I want you to think through how you're going to figure it out. And sometimes the figuring it out is simply a note of apology to whomever, right?
That's a great point. And I do like the, if it's an emergency, or if it's a band recital or something that is extraordinary, then yes, that's when we're going to help, because we are your parents, and
yes, we're not going to
we've got your back.
We're not going to abandon you. This isn't about that. This is about teaching you. We have to step back enough so that you can learn the lessons of life. We're there for the just in case, so that you don't drown or walk into traffic and so on. Okay. So if a kid is a habitual, doesn't wake themselves up, and you're trying to instill that, you've got to be comfortable with if they oversleep, they're going to miss school. Okay. You have to let that happen. Now, in some communities, they can just walk to school and walk late. In some, if they can't, if they might be biking to school, but if they're relying on you to drive them, you should not drop everything.
Right.
You should say, okay, I'm in a meeting right now, or I can't. You need to wake yourself up. You need to get up on time. Let me know if you need help setting an alarm more effectively. But you're saying we all matter here, and I've got things going on, and I'm not your concierge. And but if it's a big test that they're sleeping through, if it's like the day of the SAT and your year-old has overslept, that's not the day to teach that lesson I won't wake you up, because that would be a very cruel, sort of blown response.
Yes, no, I agree 100%. And I'm mentally taking notes, because my high schooler, and I think the transition from virtual school to in-person school, that was a transition, because he could just walk down the stairs, in his pajamas to take virtual school, and now he actually has to get up. And so it took a while, and I finally said to him, like, the bus leaves, me leaves at 7:10, and if you are not in the car, you are walking, because I have stuff to do. I have to get to work, so.
And you have to honor that, and that's what's hard.
Yes, that is hard.
Days, it shouldn't take more than a couple of times, but it'll be hard.
Yeah.
And you have to just say to yourself, I know I'm doing the right thing. I'm teaching him to do for himself, and that is the most loving thing.
Right. No, 100%. So when I first read this book, again, it was 4 years ago. They were 7 and 11 at the time. And I read the book, but the college stuff and the high school stuff, I really didn't, I didn't take it to heart then, let's just say. But now I have a freshman rising sophomore. And so I reread the book a couple weeks ago, and it's like a new set of eyes, because I'm seeing all of this stuff kind of come to fruition when it comes to classes and transcripts, and making sure you're on the right path, and college tours, and it's very overwhelming. But in the book, you talk a lot about the college arms race, and it's really challenging. So what advice do you have for parents like me who, in theory, I get it. Everything you say in your book about the college arms race, I completely agree, and that selection process. But you also see your kid having to navigate this, that sometimes is not fair, or sometimes can be really challenging. So help me out with this.
So college is a great way to spend 4 years. Not everyone has to go, but increasingly a college degree is required if you're to have a decent job. So a college degree is today what a high school degree was when I was coming up, and I'm 53. So a lot has changed. So college is important for, many people will choose that option. A highly selective college is not important.
Right.
Many of us are really overly stressed about my kid has to get to this particular brand name school or set of brand name schools. And out of some wildly overblown misinformation about what matters in life. Okay. Successful, happy people mostly didn't go to brand name schools. Some of them did. Some of them didn't go to college at all. Okay. So read Frank Bruni's book, Where You Go Is Not Who You'll Be, for some reassurance about how it's not the school. It's who the kid is wherever they end up. Okay. So you want to be nurturing your high school student toward, like, encouraging them toward which subjects light them up. They are required to take a bunch of subjects they love, hopefully at least one, maybe a bunch. They hate some others. Okay. They don't have to be great at everything. I believe in strengthening your kids' strengths. One of my kids is a hyper-focused science kid, and he took every single science class at this school, which were many elective science classes. And there were plenty of other things he paid very little attention to because that wasn't his love.
Right.
You're not trying to shape your kid to look like some college dean wants them to look. You're trying to help your kid become their best version of themselves, to lean into the things they love and to take more and more of those things, because those are the indicators of who they are and what they might want to do with their lives. So helping your kid become who they are rather than manufacturing them to look how some particular college wants them to be. Family time is essential. Downtime is essential. Sleep is essential. So they should not have a course of study that is minimalizing those other things that matter in life. If you are in a school district, your kid is in a school district that feels toxic around these measures, you might have to have a soul-searching family conversation and say, is this the right school for us? Are we really all thriving and flourishing if there's this much stress? So if the system feels overly stressful, you got to get out of the system. Okay. Or you've got to stand up in the face of that system and say, these choices are not for us and for our family. We're opting for other things. And have confidence that there is a college out there that will be delighted to have your children. Okay. Exactly. There are so many, this is a nation with 3,000 public and private four-year universities and colleges. And that means the top 5% is 150 schools. If you get a book that lists 200, 225 schools, they're all top 10%, okay, of all the schools in America. So, which is, there are also great schools in Canada and great schools in the UK and, great schools in other countries and often more affordable in these other places. So do your homework around what, would be a good fit for your kid. Encourage your kid ultimately needs to lead that process. When we drag our kids through the process because we feel like we're on a treadmill and we have to, and the kid's not ready, that's a sign the kid's not going to thrive in college. So have your kid take a gap year and explore, themselves and meaningful work and what have you. Let them go to college when they are ready to engage the process. There are better lists than US News. I recommend Colleges That Change Lives. I recommend Alumni Factor. I recommend the Fisk Guide to Colleges. All of these are going to open your eyes wider to the possibilities. And I encourage people to just stop, all of the elite brand name stuff. It's really getting in the way of what's the right fit for any particular kid.
Right, exactly. And that's so interesting. And I will link all those resources in the show notes. But one of the things you talk about in the book is how, it's kind of pay to play in some of those books or some of those magazines or some of those publications. And so it's not really, you're not getting the full picture. And so, you're looking at this magazine of the top 200 colleges, but it doesn't really necessarily mean anything to your student. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be a good fit just because they're on that top 200 list.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things I will tell you, reading the book that completely I guess, got me hooked into your philosophy and what you were talking about in the book. You made this correlation between and you referenced it earlier in our conversation, this correlation between overparenting and negatively impacting kids' confidence, which then in turn leads to depression and mental health issues in young adults, especially when they go to college and they look around and they're like, oh gosh, I can't go to the drugstore by myself, or I don't know how to do X, Y, and Z, but other people know how. What the heck's wrong with me? And so can you talk a little bit about that, what you observed as a dean?
Yeah. So my background is law and higher education. I'm not a psychologist, but in writing How to Raise an Adult, I looked to the field of psychology for evidence, if there was any, of a correlation between being overparented and underprepared and experiencing psychological difficulties. And the evidence was starting to come in. And so I cite that in the chapter on how we're harming our kids. Mm-hmm. They've been psychologically harmed is the name of the chapter. What's happening is when a person overhandles another person A overhandles person B psychologically isn't allowed to develop their own sense of their own existence. It's called agency or self-efficacy. These are related terms in the field of psychology, as I understand it. And we develop agency, a sense of I can do things by doing things. And by seeing that when we act, when we did something, there was a result. That's how our psyche learns, okay, I'm here, I'm capable, I can do things by doing things. And if we are deprived in developing agency and self-efficacy, if we don't develop that healthy sense of I can cope when things don't go my way, that can lead to this feeling of helplessness, which then leads to anxiety sometimes, extreme worry, and fear of everything, and depression, this sense of, a really low mood. So there's research that says that correlates these parenting behaviors with greater rates of anxiety and depression and lower executive function in kids. We think we're helping. And as I've said at the outset, it does appear to help in the short term because we rescued them in that moment. We took care of it. But in the long term, we've really failed them because they haven't developed the mindset and let alone the skills that a healthy functioning human needs to have.
Right. I will tell you that was the most important takeaway that I had of the book, and really shapes how I move forward with my parenting. So now your new book, let's turn the page to your new book. I am loving it. It's actually, I'm giving it away as graduation presents this year because it's awesome. And I love the PDFs that come along with it. So you can have conversations. It's really great. But and I related so much when you said, I'm looking around, something's happening. I look around the room and I'm like, who's the adult? Oh, right, that's me. I'm the adult. So I think we can all relate to that. So why did you write this book? Why, about adulting?
Yeah, because a generation, millennials, have been saying for quite some time, I don't want to adult. I don't know how to adult. It's scary. And I see the correlation between overparenting and young adults feeling like I don't want to, it's scary. I'm not saying every young adult who's struggling to launch was overparented, but certainly some have been. And so this is me very compassionately saying, yep, I get it. You're afraid. That's valid. It seems daunting. Yep, I get it. And you know what? I think you can. I believe in you. I want to be this older person with this book who's turning around from my older vantage point and shining a warm light onto readers, to illuminate what to think about, what to watch out for, what to keep in mind, all of that stuff. And so this is me rooting for all of us to make it, which is sort of my meta thing, what I'm about. I'm trying to be here to support all humans in thriving, and young adults who don't feel like they can effectively adult is a major problem for that person, but also systemically, societally. So it's a very blunt book. It's very
It is. I love it. I love the voice. I listened to it. I love your voice and everything.
I'm glad. And what I'm loving, Trish, is that older people, so it's pitched for 18 to 34-year-olds, but I'm hearing from people who are in their later 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, even saying, this book is also for me.
Yeah.
That makes sense because there isn't anything magical about adulting. It's simply you survive childhood, you're an adult, boom. You go from being more or less the responsibility of someone else to being more or less responsible for yourself. That's the distinction. So of course, everybody from 18, 20, 25 on is in that space of more or less I'm responsible for myself. And the book is effectively a mirror that shows each reader at their particular age and stage what they need to see about themselves.
Yeah, that's really great. You're right. Because so I'm 42 and I was listening to it and I was like, oh, this is really, some parts really you're exactly right, reflected back to me. I'm like, oh, okay, maybe I need to to take a look at this again, but it's a great book. And I think it's going to be, I really wish that I had it 20 years ago. And I'm not kidding you. I have them ordered and they're graduation gifts this year. So I think it's really good, really great, great topic. So I'm a little curious because you wrote both of these books pre-2020 and pre-COVID. If you were going to rewrite anything, what would be different? What did the past year, how did it impact parenting? How did it impact adulting? What do you think that the impact of 2020 had?
I actually wrote the second book during COVID.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, then there you go.
Yeah, I had only written a little bit of it and then the pandemic hit. And so I finished that book during a pandemic. I wrote probably 2/3 of it during a pandemic. And so I had to weave in reference to it, and it became this very meta thing. When you get to the later chapters on how to cope when the, what hits the fan, you'll see me say, I thought this chapter was going to be about death and disease. And now I'm writing it amid a pandemic and I'm struggling. And, but I'm going to do my best to take care of myself and write this book, which is in many ways an encapsulation of the advice in this chapter, like how to cope. You sort of look after yourself and you try to keep going. And so it got very meta. I think resilience is really a core theme at the heart of both books. Parents in How to Raise an Adult, you've got to back off enough so that your kids can experience some of the challenges of life, which strengthen them, make them resilient. And in your turn, in many chapters, I'm talking about, how you basically handle, and cope when whether it's a disaster or it's a disappointment. It's kind of taking stock of what happened and learning from it and keeping on going. So in some ways, I think these books are both both really championing resilience. And I guess the one thing that I would say that probably isn't in the book, because I didn't yet know it when I had to stop, I stopped writing the book. I was done with it in October 2020, is the lessons that we can take from struggle. Absolutely. I think a little bit of that in the book, but I would probably lean into that more and say, look, yes, this was a disaster. Yes, it was terrifying. Yes, many of us lost people. We lost income. We lost a sense of, normalcy, all of that. Yes, bad things happened. And what we need to do is look back on what we did manage.
Right. What the gifts were.
Maybe we're proud. Like, I finished this class. It was online. It was terrible, but I did it. I'm proud of myself. Or I looked after my younger siblings because my parents were so busy. I feel good about that. Or I managed to check in with my elderly relative because they were so isolated. Or whatever it is you can say, despite this or within this context of challenge, I took care of this, that, and the other. That helps fortify us. It is us telling ourselves, hey, good job, actually. This was terrible, and we still managed to do. And we
still survived.
It then informs us for next time in 2022 or 2025, whenever the next thing comes, because stuff will always go wrong. Life is chaotic. Life is out of our control. We'll then be able to say, oh, well, during the pandemic, you know what? I managed to do this, that, and the other. That will inform our future self of how to be strong in the face of the next challenge. We are literally laying down the pattern for our, or the building blocks for our future resilience.
Right. I love that. I do think, especially I saw it from my youngest, with being virtual school, he had to be an advocate for himself because I was working, my husband was working, my other son was like, we were all on our spaces and our own spaces, and he had to be an advocate for himself. And my husband and I were talking, we said, that would have came, but certainly it came quicker. Because so it was one of the gifts of speaking up and getting through it. And this isn't fun, but guess what? We have to, kind of do, be resilient, just like you said. And I think that that's definitely one of the gifts of 2020 and COVID. Absolutely, for sure.
Let
Well,
me add one thing, just one thing. We got to
absolutely.
cut ourselves more slack. And that is, I think, another
Oh,
lesson.
I like that too.
Right? Be able to say, whether it's a kid or a teacher or a parent or a coworker, we got to be able to say, you didn't fail. It was a pandemic. It wasn't your fault. We had a lot of systemic failures. There are a lot of people saying kids lost a year, kids lost a year and a half, and some kids were actually lost due to systemic failures related to socioeconomic. Poor folks, working class folks didn't have Wi-Fi, didn't have devices. I'm hearing so many, we've all been hearing about the kids who've been lost.
Yes.
But let us not put that on them. They didn't.
Oh, absolutely.
Failed them, right? And then we say to those kids, let's talk about what you did manage to do, even though school was a disaster for you. So to reframe it as this systemic stuff happened, that wasn't the failure of an individual or the failure of a family, but rather the failure of a system that had not predicted that we would all need to go online and do work in school online, and that everyone in America needed Wi-Fi. Those systems were not in place and are still not in place. So we need to cut ourselves slack as individuals when stuff well outside of our control goes wrong. It's not our fault.
Right. Yeah, no, I like that a lot. And I think that it's, just getting through it, dealing with all of that, dealing with the complications, dealing with things not working, not having everything that you need to have, not having all that stuff, looking at it as, hey, I did it in spite of this, or I got through this in spite of this. I think that's important too. Very important. So one last question before we leave, and this is the question we ask all of our guests. So what does a healthy family look like to you?
I take a lot of my lessons from Bill Stixrud, Ned Johnson. They wrote The Self-Driven Child. Micheline Duclef, who wrote Hunt, Gather, Parent. These are other people in the parenting space whom I really have such high regard for. Jess Leahy, who wrote The Gift of Failure. To me, a healthy family is one where, first of all, there's unconditional love, where everybody knows they're loved, and they learn that because they're spoken to in a loving, kind way. They're not praised only when they get the right grades or scores, but they're cherished for existing. Often we parents are so, oh, you did this, oh, you did that, I love you so much, I'm so proud. We need to be showing up in our kids' lives saying, hey, how are you? It's great to see you. How was your day? Not how was your day, what happened on the science test, but like, how was your day? How are you feeling? What's good about today? Do you need help with anything? Just this gentle kindness that is unconditional love. And so that's number one. When you have unconditional love, almost everything else works. And then it's one where everybody pitches in, everybody contributes. Chores build a sense of belonging to the family. Micheline Duclef has written about this. It builds a sense of family membership when kids are invited to participate in the work of the house, not just sort of treated like little academic automatons that just need to work on their academics and we just take care of all the business of life in the house. They need to be invited to cook. They need to be invited to clean and participate and mend and fix. That helps build a sense of belonging to the family. It then provides a sense of you're accountable, you're responsible. It builds work ethic. That's going to make them more successful out in the world of work and the world of college. And so, as I say in my TED Talk, it all boils down to chores and love. And everything else, in my view, is secondary.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. And you definitely get that through your books too. So I definitely appreciate that. So again, thank you so much for chatting with us today. I am so happy to be able to talk to you. Like I said, you certainly have made an impact on my family and many others, I am sure. As we close out, is there anything that you can tell the listeners where they can find you and where they can connect with you?
Absolutely, Trish. Thanks. And thanks to everyone who's listened. I'm on social at J Lythcott-Haims. That's my first initial last name, no hyphen. Everywhere you are on social, I'm probably there too. Not TikTok yet, but maybe one day. My website is a way to learn a little bit more about my work. That's julielythcott-haims.com, no hyphen. So yeah, check out my work. I love to try to connect on social with folks who follow me. So please do that if you feel the urge to do so. I'll be there.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. And we will put those links again in the show notes, along with your website, your TED Talk, and also links to the books too, so that our listeners can go ahead and purchase them. Well, thank you so much, Julie. I really, really appreciate it, and have a great afternoon.
Thanks, Trish. You too. Thanks to everyone
Thank
who
you.
listened.